thank you for that introduction. So the title of this presentation is Backyard Berries. So I'm really going to be focusing on raspberries specifically in the context of how you can cultivate them in your backyard or in a small scale operation. And as Becca introduced me, I am at the Northwestern Washington Research and Extension Center. I run the Small Fruit Horticulture Research Program. So I'll be focusing quite a bit on horticultural information, but I'll also cover some pest and disease management issues that you might encounter with raspberries in your backyard. And this is a fun talk, particularly in February when it's kind of gloomy and damp outside, because for me, summer is always harken up the season or the sentiments of just warm summer and just tasting summer, because to me, that's what a raspberry really is all about. They certainly are also able to be produced though in the spring and in the fall with some of the primocane fruiting varieties that we'll talk about a little bit later. So just again, this is who I am. I lead the statewide small fruit horticulture research and extension program. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done with raspberries as it pertains, I think, to a home gardener. But we focus on whole plant physiology in response to alternative management systems with the goal that these systems will be promoting the productivity of our plants, the quality of the fruit, the efficiencies of the farm, which has gotten all the more important for farming systems, and with the economic constraints that a lot of farmers are experiencing, all the while trying to maintain or enhance the natural resources here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And today we're talking about raspberries, but I also am very passionate and excited and focus on blueberry and strawberry as well. And this is my website. So I try to post research information as well as extension information on this website. So some of the resources that I mentioned, they should be available here, or you can just email me directly. My email address is right there at the bottom. Let me get my pointer going too. All right, well, let's start at the beginning. I'm going to go over a little bit of natural history information because I think it's always nice to know what we're working with and what we're talking about, and appreciate it all the more. So raspberries are in the Rosaceae family. So a lot of the fruit crops that we love and consume, apple, pear, strawberry, these are all rosaceous species. And rubus is the scientific genus that encompasses several caneberries, which includes blackberry, raspberry, red raspberry, yellow raspberry, and so forth. So they are very broad, very diverse. They are distributed on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. And then there's three subgenera that as scientists or taxonomists, we have divided rubus in. And that includes Uveitis, which includes blackberries and dewberries, Idiobatis, which includes the ones we're going to be focusing on today, red raspberries and blackberries, as well as their hybrids, and then Silactis, which are Arctic berries, ones that we don't experience here, but they're very popular in Scandinavian countries. And then, again, rubus is so diverse. That's one thing I love about rubus and raspberries and the caneberries in general. So when it comes to raspberry, we have the species that we're going to be talking about tonight. That's the European red raspberry, Rubus idaeus, but we also have several other species that we call raspberry. Rubus strigosus, which is the North American red raspberry. And then we've got Rubus leucodermis, which is a black-fruited Western raspberry. Then the one that I grew up eating, because I'm from the Midwest originally, Rubus occidentalis, the black-fruited one. And again, that's native to the Midwest as well as in the Northeast. And then they hybridize very freely. So you can have a lot of crosses and a lot of variation. An example being the purple fruited raspberry, and that's a cross between the European red raspberry traditionally and a black raspberry, and that gives that purple fruit. And it looks a lot like a blackberry or black raspberry, but it has more of a more purple coloration. And then we have the golden or the yellow raspberries, and all those are really is a mutation in the pathway that produces the red or the black pigment in raspberry, and that is very desirable in many situations, particularly niche markets or backyard gardening situations, and they are also grown as well. And then just real briefly, rubus, again, it includes blackberry as well. So we've got trailing blackberries, which are very common and widely grown in Oregon. And then we've got several other species that we grow that are more erect. They don't grow as long of canes, and then hybrids as well. So a lot of diversity there. Oh yes, and then I always forget. And then you can cross blackberries and raspberries, and you get these wonderful things called loganberries and tayberries and boysenberries. And all those are different expressions of the cross between a raspberry and a blackberry cross, and their seed progeny. So let's focus on red raspberry. This is the one that we grow here in the Northwest, and this is the one that you and I are probably most familiar with eating, whether it's from our backyard or a neighbor or farmer market or in the grocery store. So globally, this is the most important raspberry species. Most countries that consume raspberries are consuming this species. And if you were ever to look at global production of raspberry, you'd see that Russia leads in raspberry production. And they're actually growing the same type of raspberry that we're growing here in the Northwest. That's the floricane raspberry type. And then following that, you'll see Mexico, Serbia, and Poland are also important global contributors to the raspberry market, and then USA follows suit. Here in the United States, Washington State is a leader in processed red raspberry production. In fact, we're the #1 producers of processed red raspberry, and we produced 82.5 million pounds from 9,200 acres. And the processed red raspberry that is grown is primarily used to produce individually quick frozen fruit, which you'll see here. But it also can be used to make juice and purees and things that go into processed products or baked goods. And the interesting thing to me coming here is that this industry is very concentrated. So 97% of the red raspberry industry here in Washington State is in Whatcom County. And for me, it's pretty interesting to highlight how important this industry is for the fabric of that county's economy. And then if we're looking at fresh market raspberries here in the US, that is primarily coming from California. And so they produced 143.5 million pounds from 7,500 acres in 2019. And they're mostly growing a different type of raspberry. They're going to be growing the primocane fruiting, whereas we're going to be growing the floricane summer fruiting raspberry. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit so that if you're unfamiliar with those terms, you'll learn. If you are interested in learning more about the Washington red raspberry industry, and I said 97%, I think actually that statistic has fluctuated. I think last it was 99% of the industry was in Whatcom County. So my mistake, we had a few growers in the South exit out of the industry around Clark County. But if you're interested and you wanna see and learn more about the processed red raspberry industry up in Whatcom County, there's a great YouTube link, and they've produced a lot of nice promotional videos that I would love to show, but I only have about an hour to get through quite a bit of material. So moving back a little bit further when it comes to raspberry, I wanted to share that how they got their name. Their name is actually derived from the scientific name, Rubus idaeus, and they were called that because they originally called Idaea fruits because they were harvested from the slopes of Mount Idaea in Greece. And there's written record of them from Pliny the Elder dating back to 45 AD. The Romans, which you might have learned in some of your other courses and readings on fruit crops, they were really important in terms of learning and documenting and writing about how to cultivate many fruit crops, including red raspberry. And then there were the Dark Ages, and there wasn't a lot written about them. There wasn't a lot also about breeding efforts that were taken to get better quality and productivity. But by the 1500s, British gardeners all of a sudden had started to write about them, and they started adopting them and growing them. And there were popular cultivars known and recognized in London markets in the mid 1600s. So it's a crop that's been appreciated and cultivated for a long time. And they kind of met a surge of interest in the mid 1600s. Now, for all the raspberries that I'm going to be talking about, so I'm just going to move something here. Um, so there's two main types of raspberries that I've been mentioning. I've been mentioning the primocane fruiting, which is also known as the fall fruiting, and then there is the floricane fruiting, and that's the summer fruiting. Um, for all of these types of raspberries, they have perennial root systems and crowns. So that's tissue that's going to be living for 3 years or longer, but the canes themselves that will be producing the fruiting structures are biennial, so they only live 2 years. But there are some differences between those two in terms of the timing of when they form flowers, when flowering occurs, and subsequently when fruiting occurs. And these differences are going to impact not just the timing of fruit production, but how you will manage them. So let's talk about them a little bit more in detail. So let's first talk about the one that we grow here up in Washington State in terms of primarily as an industry, and that is the summer bearing floricane raspberry. So with this raspberry, I think it's important to kind of recognize that you have two types of canes that you're going to be dealing with. You have primocanes that grow the first year, right shown here, and they are completely vegetative that first season of growth. But as they're vegetative late in the summer, they take cues from the environment, changes in temperature and solar radiation and day length, and they form flower buds in the axils. They overwinter, and those flower buds emerge, and they produce lateral branches on this tissue that is now a floricane. So the primocane overwinters, it becomes a floricane that next season, and that floricane produces these lateral branches, and the fruit, well, the flowers and the fruit are born on these lateral branches. Remember, these are biennial, so after fruiting, they will start to senesce, so they will start to die, and then that tissue in the winter, that senesced or dead floricane tissue, is what you will be removing in winter when you're pruning. Meanwhile, there's another cycle or another crop of primocane that is simultaneously growing while your floricanes are fruiting. And those will be providing your renewal wood and your fruit for the next year. Now that is once your planting has been established. When you're first planting, that first year, you're only going to be producing primocane. So your first year, you will just get vegetative tissue. You won't get any fruit. It'll have to overwinter for a cycle before it will fruit. Okay. So one way that is commonly used to grow these floricane fruiting raspberries, particularly here in Washington State, is what we call a hill system. So this is where individual plants are planted about 18 to 30 inches apart. It depends on the intensity and how dense that you want them. But you plant your plants, either bare root plants or tissue culture plants or potted plants, about 18 to 30 inches apart. And there will be those primocanes that emerge from the roots and from the crown and produce your primocanes, again, that overwinter and become your fruiting floricanes. Again, you remove those fruiting floricanes in the winter and you allow that next crop of primocanes to produce the fruit for the subsequent year. We call these hills, and again, they're just simply individual plants that produce a lot of these primocanes and floricanes, and they're typically bundled together. And if they're really tall, and if we're looking at a system where we have tall canes and a machine harvest system, we will wrap them over or arc them over a top wire. And I have some pictures to show you that. And oftentimes for a good productivity, we have about 8 to 15 canes per hill. And that's a mixture of, that's referring to those floricanes and primocanes together. Okay. So see here, this is an image. Again, these are 3 hills or 3 floricane fruiting raspberry plants. This is giving you an image of what they would look like in the winter. Say you've come through, you've pruned out your floricanes, they've senesced, they've fruited. You don't want them anymore because they're dead tissue. You have taken the primocanes that have grown also that season, and you've bundled them up together and you've arced them over your top wire. And again, arcing over the top wire is something you don't need to do if you're a home gardener. I think it's nice though in the sense that rather than having your canes flailing up in the air, um, they're closer to you for harvesting when you're hand picking. And then also if you have those canes up in the air and they're really tall, it can increase their likelihood of being exposed to desiccating cold winds in the winter, depending on how cold you get. Okay, so here's just kind of an image of a commercial raspberry farm up in Linden, Washington, and it's showing how this grower has finished pruning out their senesced flora canes. They have trained their primate canes, and they are waiting for the spring to come. And if you're wondering what that white material is, it's gypsum. And so this basically calcium sulfate that growers will apply for kind of dual purposes. It'll help kind of flocculate the soil a bit. And then also it's believed that that free calcium from that gypsum will reduce the development of pathogens, in particular root rot pathogen Phytophthora. Okay. So now let's talk about the other type of raspberries that we can grow. This is the one, again, that's more common in California. It's certainly one we can grow, though, as well. And this is the primocane or the fall fruiting raspberries. This one, again, the canes are still biennial, but we don't always manage them like they're biennial or they live for 2 years. Many times, and particularly, again, where I'm from in the Midwest, we would grow these canes only for a single year. And that's because we can get fruit on single year tissue. We don't have to necessarily go through a winter to get fruit tissue. So if you can imagine here, here is our primocane raspberry plant. It's grown all of this tissue within the summer. This is, again, all 1-year-old tissue or from that season. And then come late summer and fall, when these canes get a certain height, they will start to develop flowers and fruit tissue, and that will be the source of your late summer or fall crop. Now, you can overwinter these canes, and in the early spring, you will continue to get a small crop of fruit from developed buds, or you can simply prune off in the winter these primocanes and bring up another cycle of primocanes that will produce your late summer crop. So there's 2 ways you can go about doing it. And if you produce fruit in the, sorry, someone was in the waiting room, so I let them in. So if you produce fruit in the spring, just after you get that spring crop, you can simply, again, prune out the tissue that has provided fruit and allow that next flush of primocanes to grow and provide your late summer fall crop. One downside with primocane fruiting raspberries, though, that we experience here in the Northwest is that many times the fruit production in the late summer and fall coincides with when we have our highest population densities of spotted wing Drosophila. So they are a little bit more tricky if you're dealing with spotted wing, which many of us are dealing with, on farms or as backyard gardeners. And just that term, tipping canes is just, again, simply removing some of that tissue that is previously fruited from the late fall and summer and allowing the remaining buds produce fruit for that spring production. For the primocane fruiting system, it's commonly for them to be grown in a hedgerow type system. So rather than having individual plants or hills, you'll kind of see this continuous wall of canes that are producing fruit. It's not the only way to grow them, but this is just kind of one of the more common ways that you can achieve good production. So here, the planting of those canes is a bare root or tissue culture. You're looking at planting about 2 feet apart, and then you will get more, just like the flora canes, you'll get canes emerging from those roots and from that crown tissue. And you'll thin that to about 4 to 6 canes per linear foot so that you're not overcrowding your planting. And you'll kind of maintain the width of your row to be about 12 inches wide. All right. So real quickly, I love flowers, so I'll just talk a little bit about the flowers. We call them perfect and complete, and that just means because they both have the male and female reproductive parts. And the reason I wanted to mention this too is that if you ever are worried about pollination, they have both parts to pollinate themselves and they can self-fertilize. So, you know, with tree fruits or with kiwi or other types of fruit crop, you do have to be concerned about having a pollinizer. With raspberry, they will be able to self-fertilize themselves, and that can be really helpful. And then in addition to that, they are very attractive to most insect pollinators that you might naturally have on your landscape. So many times you don't need to be concerned about bringing in additional pollinators because they're so attractive that they tend to lure pollinators in from surrounding habitats that might be around your garden. And then if you're wondering what this term is, apocarpus, I kind of debate how much to get into fruit development. I can really go down a rabbit hole there, but apocarpus means the individual carpels that are the individual fruits that become the drupelets in the raspberry. They don't fuse together. So we call raspberry an aggregate fruit because you have an aggregate of drupelets, and those drupelets were originally the carpel tissue. Quite a bit of terminology there, but if you're for the botany nerds in the room. And so when it comes to berry crops too, sometimes I feel like I lose my sense of identity because sometimes people say I'm the berry specialist, but technically I don't really work with, the majority of the crops I work with aren't truly and technically berries at the botanical level. A true berry develops from a single flower with one fertilized ovary. So a classic example would be a tomato or a blueberry. Whereas raspberry is an aggregate fruit where we have, again, those individual carpels that are fertilized, they form fruit, and they are connected together and form one aggregate of drupelets. That's a raspberry, same with a blackberry. So once we get pollination, which typically occurs around May, with our Flora King fruiting raspberries, we have a pretty long and extended bloom period, or excuse me, June. June tends to be our peak bloom period. And then we start transitioning into, at the end of June, early July, the initiation of harvest. And harvest can last for a very long period of time, just given the fruiting nature of raspberry that stems from the flowering nature. In Whatcom County, where we spend a lot of our time doing research on farms, it's not uncommon for us to be harvesting from the end of June all the way through mid-August. And in these systems, it's a pretty intensive system. A lot of hand pick operations are like this as well. To get the maximum quality, they're out in the field, picking every 2 to 3 days for about a month. And with our industry, because we're processing it, we're freezing it, or choosing to juice and crumbs, we can harvest with these over-the-road machine harvesters. But for fresh market, it has to be picked by hand. Otherwise, we get bruising. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about how do we grow raspberries. And this information will be applicable to both floricane and primocane fruiting raspberries. So the nice thing about raspberries is that they are adapted to a fairly wide range of soils and climate. And here in Western Washington, we're really blessed with having overall pretty good climatic conditions. With our dry and cool summers, that's really good at producing good quality fruit and minimizing a lot of disease pressure. And we tend to have mild winters, and periodically we'll get cold and we'll have cold, drying, desiccating winds, and that can cause some winter injury, but it tends to be pretty mild and localized. Land is, typically flat or gently sloped, as that tends to be most ideal for raspberry production. If we have too high of slopes, we can have increased likelihood of erosion concerns as well. The roots of the raspberry plant themselves are can be pretty deep. It's not like a strawberry or a blueberry where they're also pretty small and localized. And because of that, the roots of the soil should be relatively deep, and also raspberries do best in well-drained soil. So if you're looking at growing raspberries, if you can pick a drier spot with a loamy or sandy loam soils, they will be most happy there. Again, as I mentioned, we are pretty fortunate here on the western side of the state. We tend not to have too many issues with cold hardiness, whereas east of the Cascade Mountains, we do have issues with that. And I would recommend protected culture and focusing on using cultivars that are more adapted to those cold conditions. So some of you might not necessarily have the luxury of a well-drained site. Our backyard is like that. We don't have very good drainage where we're at. So there are ways you can try to work around that. And raised beds can really help facilitate making a site that can be a little bit wet and marginal for raspberries more suitable. And so this is a commercially sized raised beds. These are, these are about a taller than a foot, and these are mechanically made. They don't have to be that tall. 6 to 8 inches can give you some nice adequate drainage in the root zone, and can also not only help with root health, but also help reduce the development of soil-borne diseases, because you're mitigating that excessive moisture that can really cause increased infection. However, kind of it's a double-edged sword. If you are growing in raised beds, you do have to be a little bit more attentive to irrigation, because it does tend to dry out sooner. And we'll talk about irrigation a little bit later, but you want to make sure that your plants are irrigated. So not too wet, not too dry. Just make sure, treat them like Goldilocks. So for site preparation, in the perfect world, we would be thinking about doing a soil test at least a year before planting. I know many home gardener situations, ourselves like included, we don't do a test 1 year in advance. And generally, you can get by with raspberry not doing a test in advance. But if you are planning ahead, or you're looking at larger acreage, a soil test can be pretty informative and allow you to make some pre-plant decisions that might be difficult to do after planting. Soil pH, though, like with many fruit crops, they like it slightly acidic, so pH 5.5 to 6.5. Here in Western Washington, with our rainfalls, we tend to naturally have fairly acidic soil conditions. That's really good for raspberries. So typically you don't need to modify soil pH. One of our bigger concerns, though, that kind of coincides with our abundant rainfall, is that we do have issues with soil-borne diseases, root rot being among the most problematic. And I'll talk about root rot a little bit later, but if you're in a situation where you have root rot, or if you're concerned about soil-borne diseases, then there might be some considerations that you have to take, either moving to a more optimal site, using genetics that can provide some tolerance or resistance, or even maybe looking at biofumigation and utilizing cover crops that can help suppress soil-borne pathogens. Okay, so this is where I'm going to bring in some of the research that we've done, and this is pertains to plastic mulches. So when we came to, well, I speak about we, I'm meaning my research program with some of the grad students. So raspberry growers were transitioning to using tissue culture transplants. So just little really tiny, relatively delicate plants, which was a very different type of planting material than what they were traditionally used to. And they were traditionally used to using bare root plants or roots as their planting material. And so they asked me if there were any ways that we could devise that could try to help increase plant establishment, and all the while also reduce herbicide application. And we suggested, why not looking at plastic mulches, both traditional polyethylene mulches that are widely used in strawberry production and vegetable production systems, but also looking at biodegradable alternatives. And so we did that work back in 2017. These are some of the materials that we tested. You don't have to know all the details, just basically that there were 4 biodegradable mulch treatments, and these are plastic biodegradable mulches, and we compared that to traditional polyethylene plastic mulch, which is not degradable, and then the standard grower practice, which was bare ground. So weed management through hand weeding and herbicide application. And so this is what our planting looked like. This was on a grower cooperator site in May of 2017. And we were really astonished with how quickly the plants responded to our mulch treatment. So as you can see here, this is then taken a couple months later, July 2017, and you'll see our plant on the left is the one that's grown with the standard grower practice, and the one on the right is from one of our mulch treatments. So early on, we could see a significant difference in height. Flash forward now, let's look at April 2018. We could still see a visible difference in our mulch plants compared to bare ground. And again, the plants, the pictures, the 5 pictures on the kind of starting from the left and moving forward, those are all pictures of our mulch plants, and then bare ground on the furthest right. So we also collected data and we looked at plant height and cane number. So how many plants are emerging from a hill or for a plant, and how tall are they? And this is our plant primocane height or plant height data. And we collected this every month. And basically the green line is our bare ground control. And then all the other colored lines are our mulch treatments, both biodegradable and non-degradable. And what we found is that regardless of what type of mulch you were using, all mulch plants were statistically the same and 14 inches taller than the bare ground control. So the growers are really excited by that. They were also excited with the number of canes coming from a plant. So the taller your plants are and the more canes you have per plant, the higher your yield potential. So in this figure, we're again looking at basically the number of canes per hill or per plant. And we measured this from July all the way through October every month. And the green line represents our bare ground grower standard practice, and the other colored lines are mulch treatments. Mulch treatments, again, didn't differ. What did differ at the statistical level was that all of our mulch plants had approximately 5 more primocanes than our bare ground control. So great, they grew more, vegetatively speaking. Did they yield more? Well, we collected those data for 2 years in a row. And long story short, plants that were mulched had anywhere from 31 to 41% greater yield than non-mulch plants during the first harvest year. That second year, we didn't see any benefits from the mulching. We had removed the mulches by that time. The mulches were only on for about 12 months. And so what it told us is that mulching can be a really good establishment tool for tissue culture transplants, and both biodegradable and polyethylene mulches worked the same. So if your growers were interested in using the biodegradable mulch technology, that was an option. And we also didn't see any differences in fruit size or quality, so that was maintained. Oh, and that's just showing all of the mulch plants statistically were greater than the bare ground control. So just some of our conclusions and why I'm sharing this. What we learned is that mulching improved plant growth that first year yield in a spring planted system. So this was planted in May. We did a second experiment in a late summer planting, so a planting that was planted in August, and we did not see a benefit from mulching in that situation, nor did our biodegradable mulches, which tend to be thinner and I would say less durable, did they overwinter. Why we believe mulching increased yield and growth that first year is 2 reasons. It controlled the weeds better. Bare ground, the growers had to weed at least 3 times and apply herbicides. And then with the mulches, they had no herbicides that they applied during establishment, and they only hand weeded the planting holes once. So reduced weed pressure, and then also increased soil temperature. That black color from the black mulches that we used really is good at conducting that heat to the soil and increasing soil temperature, which has a benefit on plant growth. And the temperature increase was anywhere from 2.7 to 3.6 degrees. Again, minimal hand weeding in those plots. We also measured root lesion nematode populations, which is another important plant parasitic nematode in these systems, and they were greater in mulch plots, particularly polyethylene or the non-degradable mulch, but it wasn't at the point where we saw any yield decreases. The other thing too, and this is going down a different path, I'm happy to talk about it later. We did see minimal in-soil degradation of biodegradable mulches after 2 years. So they didn't degrade as they are advertised to or as in accordance with the standards. And we have reasons why we think that occurred, and we're studying ways to enhance in-soil degradation so that we're trying to develop agricultural systems that aren't too dependent on single-use plastics. And then PE mulch removal, we do have some concerns about using polyethylene mulch and trying to find improved end-of-life management tools for polyethylene mulch. One concern is just the waste generation, and then another concern was how much topsoil it removed because of the soil that adheres to the mulch. And we estimated based on samples that we collected that it could remove about 1,000 pounds of topsoil per acre during the removal process. And then economic analysis, though, and what we found out and what growers have also found out through adopting this technology is that first year net returns are greater when using polyethylene and biodegradable mulches compared to the traditional. So mulching for your system, whether it be black plastic, you're interested in biodegradables, or a black landscape fabric, I think they could be really good tools to help increase plant establishment and weed management. Okay, so now let's leave mulching behind and focus on nutrient management. I'm going to be spending the most time talking about nitrogen because that is the primary nutrient that we're concerned about in these systems. And so just to remember why we're adding nutrients to these systems every year, that's because when we harvest our fruit, when we prune out the senesced floricanes, or when the leaves fall, those are all ways that nutrients tied up in that tissue can leave our system. And so we have to think about making sure that those nutrients are being replenished. And just kind of some fun statistics from my colleague down south at Oregon State University. They did research studies and showed that when you're harvesting fruit, you're exporting about 3.5 pounds of nitrogen per ton of fruit. And then when you're pruning, you're removing 17.3 pounds of nitrogen per acre of prunings. So again, that has to be removed in order, or that when you're removing those nutrients, it has to be replenished through your fertilizer additions. And so this guide, which is on my website, goes through and provides some information on fertilizer recommendations with an emphasis on nitrogen. And these are in pounds per acre. So I'll also go over what you might be looking at for a smaller situation where you only are having a few plants. But establishment year, when you first are planting the plants, you don't have fruit, you have smaller plants. So you're going with a lower rate, 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then subsequent years, as those plants increase in size and you have the demand of fruit production, you'll increase to 50 to 60, 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And raspberry works best if you're using a dry fertilizer, whether it's organic or synthetic. It works best if you split it. So you apply some at the beginning of primocane emergence and then some around June. Not all of it all at once because the plant seldom is able to take it up all at once. You can also do fertigation. So that's applying liquid fertilizer through your drip irrigation system if you have one. That also works really well. You just have to be a little bit more frequent with how frequently you're applying it. So usually we're looking at 5 to 10 pounds of nitrogen per acre every week to 2 weeks from the beginning of primocane emergence through June, or about a month before harvest. And then foliar feeding, so that's applying nutrients to the leaf tissue. That's something I wouldn't recommend for nitrogen, but it can work for other nutrients, calcium and boron to name a few. And then if you are concerned about your tissue nutrient status, you can always do tissue testing and soil testing. The tissue testing is what's most informative because your soil test doesn't always reflect what your plant is taking up. And again, this guide will give you more details on how to do that if that's a path you pursue. So if you're in a smaller situation where you don't want to be thinking about applying in pounds of per acre, this is a nice breakdown for a smaller scale situation. So at planting, again, when the plants are smaller, looking at applying of your choice fertilizer like a 16/16, a half to 1 ounce of nitrogen. And splitting it, this time splitting it into thirds. So 1/3 2 weeks after planting, your next third a month after planting, and then the next third another month after the second application. And then when your plants are established, so not your planting year, you'll increase that rate to 1 to 1.5 ounces of nitrogen using your fertilizer of choice and split it. So a third when primocanes start to grow in the spring, the next third at the end of May, early June, and the next third near the end of June, early July. And this is all for dry fertilizers. If you go with liquid, again, you can use the same rates, just smaller amounts more frequently from primocane growth through the end of June, early July. And then, I think you don't always have to do tissue testing. You can visually look at your plants. That's really helpful. If they're, green to light, or if they're dark and green, that's an indication they're pretty healthy and you're happy with the fruit production. If they're a little yellow in coloration, that's usually an indication that something's lacking. And it could be nutritional, but it could be other aspects as well. If you're looking at fertilizer choices, again, you can go with synthetic fertilizers, or you can also use organic alternatives. Manures can work really great. Up in Whatcom County, there's a lot of dairy, so they're often looking at dairy fertilizers in various forms and at various stages. And then fish emulsion is a common organic alternative. Okay, so I wanted to include this here. I won't spend too much time, but if you are doing a soil test, these are recommended soil sufficiency levels to kind of help guide you. So if you, for example, take a soil test and you find you're really low on phosphorus, planting is a great time to apply phosphorus in particular, because it's one that doesn't readily move down into your soil profile like nitrogen does. And then likewise, if you engage in tissue sampling, there are resources available to help guide you through that. The one that I mentioned on the previous slide, it's also on my website. It will go through how you can perform doing that, but the key thing is making sure you're collecting at the right time. That's usually end of July through early August, and that's because that's when tissue nutrients stabilize in the plant, and you can compare your results to known standards and figure out if it's deficient, if it's adequate, if it's in excess. For raspberry, we're looking at sampling the most recently expanded primocane leaf. That's about a foot away from the growing point of the primocanes. And that's important too, just to standardize the approach to make sure you're collecting that tissue correctly and the right tissue for comparison purposes. And then if you're in a situation where there's plants that are showing problems, maybe it's a couple of plants and you're wondering if it could be fertilizer misapplication or something, make sure you sample the problem plant separately so that you can compare and see if it might have been a nutrient related issue that is contributing to the problems. And then for backyard garden situation, not necessarily essential, but oftentimes our growers are managing cultivars very differently based on their growth patterns and yield projections. So in those cases, we recommend they sample cultivars separately, but it's not essential that you do that. Again, and if you do tissue sampling, here you have now the standards for raspberry. So this will tell you, if you're above that amount, you're in excess, or if you're below this range, you might be in a deficiency situation and wanting to amend that. So just for your reference there. All right, so let's now transition and talk a bit about irrigation. Irrigation is really important too for nutrient management because most of the nutrients we're talking about are dissolved in the soil solution. So you have to have some moisture there, not just for plant growth and maintenance, but also for the nutrients to be able to be taken up by the plant's root system. So in raspberry, most of the roots that are active in taking up nutrients and water are in that first foot of soil. And there are key critical periods for irrigating. The first is that planting year when the root system is small, it's not well developed yet. You need to make sure that you're diligent and you're out there multiple times a week and making sure that the soil's not getting dried out and it's also not getting too saturated either. And then when the planting is established, you want to make sure that you're providing irrigation for the most part from flowering to harvest, because that is a pretty nutrient and water intensive time. And if you are to withhold water or if you're withholding nutrients, you might be limiting fruit development, and that could result in a reduced crop, which not many people would want if they're growing raspberries. Roughly speaking, when you have those established plants, you're trying to aim for 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water a week. And I think, for raspberry, it's good not to have their root system constantly wet. So water a few times a week, water deeply and infrequently, and try to get down to have that water get down to about 6 to 12 inches. If you have a drip irrigation system in your yard, that can be really beneficial to, say, a soaker hose or other types of hose. That part of that is because it's putting water right in the zone of uptake by the root system, and you're reducing water getting on your fruit and on your foliage, which can contribute to disease problems. So if you're going with a drip irrigation system, a single line of drip tape like you see in this picture here from a grower farm works great. One per row, you don't need multiple ones, and emitters that are half-gallon emitters every 18 inches can work really well. I would recommend not burying them. I've seen that a couple of times. Part of that is because certain cultivars of raspberry are prolific root producers, and they produce roots and they will plug up your drip emitters, and that really compromises the drip system, and you have to look at replacing it soon. And it also limits the water from being released from those drip emitters. So placing the drip on top of the soil or even suspended on a trellising wire that you might be using can be helpful. Okay. So next I want to talk about cultivar resources. So there are a number of cultivars that you can try to grow in the backyard. This is one guide that is for the Pacific Northwest that I encourage you to take a look. There's too many to go over, but I just will kind of point out a few. This is also something from the Commercial Red Raspberry, from the Washington Red Raspberry Commission. So it also highlights a few other cultivars. Our processing growers grow primarily Meeker, which is this one here, and then they're growing Wakefield and Shamanus and Rudy. Fresh market growers, or if you're looking for really good fresh market fruit, Tulamine is a really good one, and some of the Cascade ones as well. Cascade, those are series from Washington State University and our plant breeding program there. And many of them have resistance to diseases, in particular root rot. So I feel like picking out cultivars is like picking out children, which one you like best. But so I went through and I listed some that I think are kind of the easiest to grow, that have good fruit quality characteristics that you might be interested in. So the first table on the upper left are floricane or summer bearing varieties. Those are the ones where peak production is going to be in July. Prelude, Willamette, and Tulamine are all very nice, I'd say home gardener friendly summer bearing cultivars. And the reason I selected them are things like their resistance to root rot, hardiness levels, and the quality of their fruit. Prelude's great for fresh. You can do it for processing as well. Willamette was kind of the backbone of our industry before Meeker as a variety came into line. It's got resistance to a virus disease, raspberry bushy dwarf virus, that we'll talk about. Excellent flavor, and if you want something for processing, Willamette's wonderful. And then Tulamine I put up there. I have a love-hate relationship with Tulamine. It's got wonderful fruit. It is known internationally for great fruit quality, but it is so sensitive to root rot, so it can be a difficult one to grow in marginal sites. And then for the primocane or fall-bearing cultivars, Polka and Heritage are both pretty safe ones to grow. They are pretty adaptable, particularly Heritage. That's kind of the most cosmopolitan primocane fruiting cultivar. Some people consider it bland, but I think it's got a good flavor, and it's a nice one to grow if you're starting to get into the fall-bearing cultivars. But there's many more. Okay, so to round this out, and before we open it up to questions, I wanted to talk about plant problems. So again, I'm not a plant pathologist, nor am I an entomologist, but I do want to give you a few pieces of wisdom about what you can look for, as well as what resources you can consult. So this page is showing resources. We have the Pacific Northwest Pest Management Handbooks, are great for identifying and then learning what are various conventional, organic, and cultural methods of controlling or managing plant problems like insects and disease. And then if you are in a situation where you're trying to identify a plant problem, WCU has diagnostic clinics in Puyallup and Pullman, but master gardeners can also be very resourceful as well. So the first plant problem, I've mentioned it a couple of times, is Phytophthora root rot, or Phytophthora rubi. This is, after parasitic nematodes, the number one reason raspberry growers are fumigating their soils so frequently. This pathogen basically attacks and kills the root system, and it leads to a very reduced root system like you see here. So a plant with a reduced root system like that is going to be unable to take up enough water and nutrients to properly grow and develop a crop. The pathogen that causes this disease has two phases, and one phase is very motile in water. And so areas with poor drainage or lots of water during various parts of the year can really have worse Phytophthora problems than drier sites. You can still have Phytophthora at drier sites so as well, just that the combination of poor root health because of lack of drainage and then just the ability of the pathogen to spread can make it difficult to manage. To manage Phytophthora, again, most growers are fumigating their soil. It's difficult to rotate and try to get rid of this pathogen because one of the resting spores can last for years in the soil. So most growers will manage through soil fumigation. In a home garden situation, I would try to again manage through site selection. So picking a site with good drainage, using raised beds. And if you have Phytophthora in your landscape and you're trying to, grow and not succumb to the pathogen, I would be looking at some of the Cascade series cultivars or other cultivars that have resistance or tolerance to the pathogen. Next is spotted wing Drosophila. So this one's a tough one for a lot of fruit crops. So spotted wing Drosophila, just to recap, this is a fruit fly that was introduced in 2009, and the female deposits her eggs inside fruit, and they hatch and grow into these larvae that not many people want in their fruit. What you can do to manage spotted wing Drosophila, one is selection of cultivars. The summer bearing cultivars tend to have, I'm not going to say they have no problems, but they tend to have less problems depending on spotted wing Drosophila population densities and where they're at. The population densities of spotted wing Drosophila really tend to peak when the primocane fruiters are bearing fruit. So that's one way to kind of try to reduce the pressure is by selecting cultivars that have a fruit production window that does not overlap or overlaps less with spotted wing Drosophila. How you can monitor populations, and I have another reference there that you can use to monitor populations, either through vinegar traps or monitoring the fruit themselves. If you have spotted wing Drosophila, then there's various management practices you can take. Spinosades are one option that can be used. It's a spray that can be used in a home gardener situation, derived from bacteria in the soil. And again, they can provide pretty good control. Just make sure you're rotating it because you don't want to develop resistance, and there's formulations approved that are approved for organic as well. But always read the label whenever you're applying any pesticide. But that's one that can have some good effectiveness against spotted wing Drosophila. Some cultural ways you can do it is, well, pick frequently and pick when fruit's cool. So good on maybe that 2 or 3 day picking cycle. Overly developed fruit are great attractors for spotted wing Drosophila. So if you're picking frequently, you don't have a lot of overripe fruit, you can reduce infestation that way. And then the other way by picking frequently and cooling fruit is that if there are any eggs in the fruit, cooling it arrests the development of those eggs and larvae. So they might be in there, but they won't develop further. Sanitation, so cleaning up fruit that drop on the ground. Spotted wing Drosophila has a phase where fruit on the ground is part of the completion of the life cycle. So if you keep it off the ground, you'll be limiting that life cycle and continuous reproduction. Also pruning for an open canopy and keeping it aerated. So not having overly dense canopies because it's cool and moist, that can kind of be really conducive for spotted wing Drosophila. And then, what they do in some situations, particularly in organic situations, like in Europe, they use exclusion netting. So just growing the berries and netting them so spotted wing Drosophila can't get in. So if you're interested in looking at how to monitor spotted wing Drosophila populations, this is another guide that is available for free. Monitoring, identifying, and fruit sampling. So there's a vinegar trap, and then again, there's another way that you collect fruit and you put them in saline water and you look for the emergence of larvae, and that can give you an indication of infection and infestation. Okay, so then there's raspberry bushy dwarf virus. This is actually a complex of many different viruses, and what it does is that it causes crumbly fruit. So what you see on the right, that is what fruit looks like from raspberry bushy dwarf. Seldom do we see any symptoms of the leaves, or we don't see a bushy plant. It's just crumbly fruit. Some people think it's pollination. Again, usually we have very good pollination. If you're getting crumbly fruit, it's often an indication of a viral infection. This virus is pollen transmitted. It moves very rapidly through the plant and through a planting. So once infected, the plant will be infected for life. If you have raspberry bushy dwarf virus, one way to manage it is, if you observe it roguing out plants, or you can prevent it from coming to your garden by using virus-free plants. So that'll help you minimize just introducing it to your backyard. And most nurseries, particularly nurseries that specialize in raspberry, will be able to certify, or should be able to certify, if they're free of virus like raspberry bushy dwarf virus. And then there's a few other plant problems I just want to mention to be on the lookout for. We have yellow rust, that's in the top left here. This one is pretty straightforward to manage, though. If you see you have an outbreak, culturally speaking, you can remove those floricanes, prune them out and destroy them. That'll reduce the inoculum. And then also any leaves that fall on the ground, try to till those up and apply urea and just break down the leaf tissue to reduce that fungal inoculum. Next, this one isn't a biological pest, but it's sunburn. So if we have low humidity and high ultraviolet light, that can lead certain cultivars in particular to get sunburn. Ways to mitigate this or avoid that is, well, using sometimes it just happens, it's the environment that we live in, but in areas where it's a big problem, they actually use shade tunnels to reduce the incidence. And then we have raspberry crown borer. So this is one where this is actually a moth right here that looks like a wasp. Larvae from this moth will bore in the crown and in cane tissue. So that's very disruptive and detrimental to the plant. It'll kill the plant. And if you observe symptoms like this, and if you observe the crown borer, it's best to remove that plant completely and destroy that tissue and the insect. And then another one is rose stem girdler. So this one is kind of a green metallic colored beetle. And again, larvae will bore into the canes. This one is relatively new for our region. It's a little bit more easily managed. So if you notice these knobs growing on your canes, that's an indication that you've got rose stem girdler. If you prune below that knobby area and destroy the tissue above it, that is one way to get rid of raspberry crown borer and maintain your planting. Through the Q&A session will further your interest in growing raspberries or expanding on your raspberry garden. Lastly too, so my unit, we are developing, or we have developed, an organic and sustainable agriculture program. It's a 4-year program at the WSU Everett campus. So if you are interested, or if you have anyone interested in this degree program or learning more about it, you have Nanette McGrath. She's the academic advisor and recruiter that you can reach out to. But the goal is an experiential based program and course focused on organic and sustainable agriculture through the Everett campus. So with that, I want to thank you, and I will turn off my screen share so I can start going through some of the questions.
Someone wanted to know if blackberries get similar sunburn problems.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So raspberries can get sunburn problems as well. And in addition, blackberries can have what we call reversion, where after picking, they will lose that black coloration and turn slightly red and look like they're unripe. And we really don't necessarily know what exactly is causing that. We think it's a temperature effect from picking at high temperatures to cold temperatures, but we don't know, and which means we don't always know how to manage for it.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but my primocane, well, I have the kind that get the floricanes. But I had some fence work done, and they were all trampled, and so everything is flattened. And I'm just wondering, will my perennial roots like come back, because I usually have canes that overwinter, but now I don't have anything.
Yeah, so no, I'm sorry that had to happen. That sounds kind of traumatic. But yes, they should emerge this spring. You should get a nice flush of primate cane growth, and they should do fine thereafter.
If the presentation will be available online, and yes, it will be on the South Sound Fruit Society's Facebook or YouTube channel, so you can watch it again. And Peggy or Penny would like to know, what type of mulch would you recommend for home raspberry beds of 30 foot by 4 foot?
Yeah, so mulching, I think looking at something that will increase your soil temperature is good. So if you have access to any type of landscape fabric, that can be good at increasing soil temperature. You know, some of the other options like polyethylene or the biodegradable options, you can see if your garden supplier has them. However, you know, the biodegradables, I would say we're still trying to figure out how biodegradable they are. They're still plastic, so and they do break down over time. So I might recommend waiting on that technology until we have it a little bit further along. So far, what a lot of home gardeners have liked and what I've enjoyed is the landscape fabric, because that can give you a lot of durability, and just make sure when you're cutting the holes for your plants that you make them large enough that you can allow primate canes to continue to emerge.
And wanted to know, since our climate is heating up, what are some cultivars that are more resistant to sunburn? Are growers in California using shade tunnels, or do they have more heat resistant cultivars?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I wish you were one of the reviewers for a grant that several of us here in the Northwest submitted that was trying to look at adaptation to high climates and what we can do. So right now we don't have a great handle on genetics that are more resistant to heat and sunburn, but we do know how we can manage it environmentally. So tunnels, like shade structures, those can help. In instances where we have the risk of sunburn, oftentimes it's low humidity conditions, because the humidity otherwise when it's there can actually prevent a lot of UV radiation from directly hitting the fruit. So sometimes they'll apply misters to just increase the humidity and decrease the potential for sunburn. But tunnels for the most part are widely used.
Also wanted to know, is intercropping nitrogen fixing cover crops a good way to supply raspberries with their nitrogen needs?
Yes, that's a great question. I wish we did some work on that. We did alleyway cover cropping, so intercropping it. And you know, we didn't notice any declines in yield for established plants, but when your plants are young, they actually can outcompete the raspberry for nutrients. And if you're going with a raised bed system, the roots tend to be pretty localized. So a lot of the nutrients should be applied to the raised bed area. And if you're, say, intercropping in between, that's great, but it won't, I mean, in terms of the soil health benefits, but it won't necessarily transfer to your raspberry plants.
And Bill wanted to know, I used wood chips for mulch alongside hills, but not touching the canes. Is that okay?
Yeah, so you know, if you're happy with wood chips as a mulch, that's perfectly fine. It's not a bad thing. They're going to act as a weed suppressant. They're going to help retain moisture. It might be decreasing soil temperature, so it might be slowing down growth a little bit. But if you're happy with your production, then they're still great to use. They provide some benefits.
And I'd like to know what's meant by intercropping.
Oh, intercropping. Good point. So intercropping is growing more than just a single crop in a field situation. I think many home gardeners are already kind of intercrop, but a good example might be with raspberry. We might have rows of raspberry, and then intercropped or in between on the alleyways might be a wheat intercrop, or a grower was telling me they were trying turnip as an intercrop, just to kind of break up compaction in the soil.
I'm not seeing any more questions. If you'd like to open it up to everybody and just see if anybody has
I had
questions.
a question at the very beginning. And yeah, I know you didn't address blueberries, but are there any particular varieties that might do well in pots for blueberries?
Oh yeah, pots for blueberries. Yeah, so some of the half high cultivars, those are ones that don't get as big as the field ones. I'm just trying
Do
to
you ever,
think like, oh, sorry.
I was just wondering if you had any specific varieties that you could recommend, because looking through the different cultivars is kind of hard to determine just by looking at
Right.
their names and description.
Yeah, so let me think. So like, let's see, Chippewa, Polaris Blue, Northland. Sorry, I said that off really fast. I think Brazil Blue has some as well. Um, there's a number of them. I guess if you were looking at the nursery, I would ask for half highs or containerized blueberry plants. Some of the ones that we grow more traditionally here in the Northwest, they get so big that it's hard for them to do well in pots. So the half highs are smaller in stature. And again, those would be, maybe Chippewa, Northland. Um, let's see, I had a Polaris is another one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I did do an
Yeah.
internet search for that last winter, and I had a really hard time by trying to search for that. So I appreciate your recommendations. And
Yeah, no worries.
suggestions.
And it's amazing how quickly nurseries update, have new cultivars, and when they phase out other ones. So if you run into issues, just don't hesitate to reach out by email.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. It was excellent.
Oh, thank you.
So if you can use strawberries to intercrop.
Yeah, so you can certainly try to grow strawberries as an intercrop. Just be careful about shading. Those strawberries like a lot of sunlight, and they might be shaded out by your raspberries.
And I've been cutting off the tops of my primacanes about 6 inches above the bundles for over 30 years. I have about 30 foot of row. This is how my dad did it in the 50s in Clark County, where he grew them commercially. Should I change and tie the tips down as shown?
Nope, you don't need to. That's just one of many ways you can do it. Those tips tend to produce smaller fruit. So sometimes you'll remove those tips just because you're not interested in the smaller fruit, or it's easier for your management system. It's not detrimental to do it the way your father did it, and there's no right way or wrong way. A lot of it's grower preference for that.
It's asking, how many years can a raspberry bed grow productively?
Oh, good question. Some, if they're well taken care of, 20 years or more, they can be pretty long lasting. Unfortunately, here up in the Northwest, by Whatcom County, they're maybe 6 years or 7 years. And part of that's just because of virus and soil-borne disease issues. But home gardener situation, you can have a productive planting for decades.
I have a question. I have about 60 feet of row at the bottom of a short hill, and I've checked for boron, and I get chlorosis in the spring, and it usually clears up by midsummer. Is that just wet feet, do you think, or?
Yeah, I'm thinking what it probably is it could have been soil moisture, or if it's kind of at a low spot and cooler, the phosphorus might not necessarily be as available to the plant, because we sometimes see just a slight phosphorus deficiency that's very seasonal and maybe wetter or cooler spots, and the plants usually outgrow it.
Oh, yeah, it does. By midsummer, it's gone usually, but.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds just like that.
Okay, thank you.
So wood chips can work great. Wood chips or bark, those all can be suitable. They tend not to warm the soil as much, so you don't get as much of a growth benefit. The main thing too, though, depending on the condition of the wood chips, if they're really fresh, they can draw quite a bit of nitrogen from your plants. The microbes will basically pull out nitrogen from the soil when they're trying to break down those wood chips. So, I would lean on providing like 25% more nitrogen than what you might otherwise apply if you're putting fresh wood down.
And Questing, could you explain more about pruning? And she might want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, pruning. So let me go back here. I'm just trying to think. So was there preference on floricane pruning or primocane pruning?
It was more on, well, both of them. I found when I pruned mine, though, they tended to bush out more. Instead, like the growth came out more. And mine might be a little different. I'm on the east side of the mountains.
Okay.
But they just seem to get a lot more growth coming out instead of going up. And I thought maybe I was pruning them wrong.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I realized I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the guide wires or trellis wires. So couple of thoughts. So let's go back to this slide. I really should get better pictures, but so I'm trying to think how to best say this. So let's imagine, so these are your 3 raspberry plants. So these are your going to become your floricanes. Let's say that it's February. You've gone through and you have removed last year's primocanes. So those are gone. And these are last year's primocanes, and they're going to be this year's floricanes. How you went about pruning those is that you tried to cut relatively close to the base as you removed the dead tissue, the dead floricanes. And then you took those new primocanes and typically we're bundling them, and you might put some twine around this part and up here near the top wire and threading them through these trellis wires. Some growers and for some varieties that are more vigorous and get bushy, like Wakefield, or there's just some that really get bushy. What they'll do is they'll have more of these trellis wires that they will add, and they will use them to kind of catch the bushy part of the parts of the canes that are growing out to kind of train them and get them to grow more upright. And this can also be done for the primocane fruiters. Is that helpful, Megan?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Okay.
One other question is in the fall is when I was trimming out those primocanes that were dead. Should I wait until February or later in the spring to do that? Should I wait? Because I can obviously tell pretty easily which ones are, need to be cut out. Is it okay to cut them out, November, October, November, or should I wait until after the winter?
Yep, you can prune them out. October can be a little early depending on where you're at, but when the plants are dormant is ideal just because pruning can be stimulating. And if your plant is acclimating to winter, a pruning cut will kind of take it out of that acclimation phase. So, November, December, January, February, those are all good months to prune. Again, October might be a little early, but sometimes you're out there and you're pruning and your plants more often than not will be just fine.
Do you ever thin some of the floricanes out in the like say February if you have a whole mass of them? Is it beneficial to maybe thin them out?
Yep, if you have a lot of them, they can kind of crowd each other out, and it can also create a really dense canopy that can be difficult for pest and disease management or just create a conducive environment. So, I think 8 to 15 is kind of what we say is a good number of floricanes per hill. But you can go higher, you can go 20, maybe 23. But if you're starting to get past that, then I would start, be worried about overcrowding.
Thank you.
Helpful. Mhm.
And what is the advantage of to bundling the canes together as opposed to letting them just go wild?
Yeah, so part of that is, twofold. So it's for just kind of for keeping them organized so they're not blowing around and abrading. And then the other one, a lot of it's an advent for machine harvesting. So, um, we're, and this is my bias. Oftentimes we're coming in and we're machine harvesting these fruits. So we want kind of these individual plant units that are, combed over so the machine can pass through them, and we're not having branches out on the side that might be, breaking off or hitting a picker or a field worker. So it kind of help contain the growth a little bit more. So it's not going out into your row.
And are the purple raspberries pruned later than the reds?
Nope, you can prune the purples and the reds same time. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. I'm going to call the meeting to a close.